Okay, so today we're going to be diving deep into a hot topic that's been making headlines recently, the triple lock. It's a policy here in the UK that guarantees annual increases in the state pension by the highest of three factors: average earnings growth, inflation, or a minimum of 2.5%. But is it sustainable in the long run? I mean, are we just setting ourselves up for an intergenerational trick where today's gains may vanish tomorrow? Before we get into this, let me hit you with a few things that will put this all into perspective. So the triple lock was introduced to ensure that the state pension keeps pace with the cost of living and provides a reliable income for retirees. If we go back to 1979, the basic state pension was worth about 26% of average, mean, full-time weekly earnings. Then, the Social Security Act of 1980, Margaret Thatcher's government broke the earnings link, and instead it moved to price indexation of the state pension. As the economy and earnings subsequently grew in the following decade, this led to a substantial decline in the level of state pension as a percentage of earnings. And while this policy of price indexation was retained during a period of New Labour government, it fell to less than 16% of earnings in 2008. So this is important to be aware of. Before the triple lock, there was an erosion in the value of this benefit compared to where it started. But anyway, since the introduction of the new state pension, aided to a lesser extent by the triple lock, there's been a period of very poor earnings growth relative to inflation. And this has really flipped the trend, with the new state pension now in 2022 worth almost 25% of average full-time earnings. That's the highest level since 1980, and close to its record high as a fraction of earnings. There was, however, a temporary one-year suspension in 2022 where the wages bit was broken. And the question is, look, if we've broken that link before, does that mean we're inevitably going to do it again? So, do you think pensioners have been living it up? And there is an extra focus here because many in work are really feeling the pain of higher mortgage rates right now. Whereas on an intergenerational level, many who've retired own their own home. So as state pension increases apply regardless of wealth, many older people are comparably doing really well out of this triple lock. And what makes this problem even more thorny is that no one really knows how much debt we as a country can handle. Look, apart from what Liz Truss did, whatever it was, that was too much. Is the sustainability of the triple lock a real burning issue? When we've got ageing populations and rising life expectancy, the cost of the state pension is bound to soar. And this poses significant challenges to government finances, especially given the economic uncertainties that we face. So, as someone who's in my mid-30s and also makes a living advising people at retirement, let's discuss the pros and cons of this whole situation. But let's first clear up some misconceptions. Contrary to popular belief, there is no pot with your name on it for the state pension. The state pension is funded by the taxes of the current working generation. I'm quite aware that even me saying this might awaken the trolls, because there have been countless campaign debates and Twitter trolls who focus on this. So while I'm going there, it's also important to realise that the state pension is legally defined as a benefit, not an entitlement. Benefits can change. This is not my opinion, this has been confirmed by 3 ex-pension ministers. So let's explore what's really going on. And for any of those who are getting really annoyed at what I'm saying, let's just take a deep breath. We're all friends here, it's just a debate. So let's look at where we are today. So roll on this excellent paper from the Institute of Physical Studies, where they review the position between generations and the fairness of the triple lock. And if we have a quick look at it here, there's a ratio called the old age support ratio. And this is one way to measure the proportion of people that are working, paying taxes and providing care in society. It's calculated by dividing the number of working age people by the number of people eligible for the state pension. So as you can see, over time, the forecasts are in the UK, we're having to deal with more people retired compared to those who are working. And the old age ratio sets a baseline figure for this balance. Now in 2012, the ratio was 3.21 people of working age for every person of state pension age. And as we adjust this, even as we go as soon as 2037, this starts to drop sharply. Now that isn't a very long time. If I overlay this with the international standards from JP Morgan, you can see that aging populations really is a megatrend that affects most countries. This isn't just us. The decrease in people having kids and aging populations is a demographic megatrend. So let's talk about the trickiest area here: fairness. I think any decent person would want those who are getting older to have a good quality of life. So I think when we're debating this, it's important to take that off the table. The question is more, are these seemingly quite generous increases on the state pension going to be able to be sustained in the long term? Finally, an additional real risk for individuals is that retaining the triple lock for too long increases state pension spending so significantly that it leads to unsurmountable pressure for a much higher state pension age. This would particularly affect people with poorer health who are struggling to remain in employment until they reach state pension age. So you could argue that these people are probably the most vulnerable to changes. So for example, people who are in their 20s and 30s, there remains a long time until state pension age. But for those in their 50s who perhaps have health issues, each year the state pension maybe gets extended could make a significant difference with very little time to make up for it and to plan for it. But wait, I bet you're thinking, at the end of the day, other countries manage this. Our state pension in the UK isn't that generous. So let's look at the data into this. And when we look into other countries, it is really hard to compare different systems with ours. The new state pension, which everyone gets after the 6th of April 2016, is based on national insurance record, and there isn't any earnings related link as part of this. In contrast, many other countries have much broader state pension systems where the amount you get is based on contributions or earnings. In those countries, state pension contributions are much higher and there's less reliance on private pensions, so it's really difficult to unpick those elements. But if we go over these figures from Interactive Investor, you'll notice the comparisons, and you'll see that Germany and France, which provides pensions of 48 and 50% of average earnings, while the percentage of GDP spent on pensions is low compared to other countries, like France, which has a much lower level of pensioners in poverty as a consequence. I think what's really interesting to watch out for here is the Australia stat, because the UK, it could be argued, is very much modelling auto-enrolment on the Australian model. And they have a shocking 23.7% of pensioners in poverty, according to this research. Now, these figures were from 2022, so not bang up to date. And I do want to caveat, look, there are probably many other more complicated reasons than just the state pension of things like this and pensioners in poverty. But when you compare the likes of Australia with Denmark, or even us, on a national scale, that is enormous, and it's something that we think we need to be very careful about. So if we zoom out on some other research, it's time for the CFA Institute and their Global Pension Index for 2022. And the results here look a bit more Eurovision than a pension index. So the UK are, as like Eurovision, are in an okay position currently, quite a lot ahead of the US, which is what you'd expect from the country who, it's built on getting your own support, etc. But we're still way further down the rankings than I think many Brits would like. Oh, just before I go into one more thing, if you're watching this right now and you found it useful, can I ask you to give this video a like and subscribe to the channel? It helps get this channel out to more good people like you, and I would love to have you on the journey. So what can we do about this? I think first, this is a discussion we should be having more, and I think it's important because it speaks to a wider debate about our society and societal promises. So I guess I can only really speak for myself, and I personally think the state pension will likely be very different if I'm fortunate enough to reach state pension age. I think it will still exist, but I'm trying to fund my retirement on the basis to be as self-reliant as possible. And I think that just makes good sense if you can afford to do so. So are there any solutions? And I think solutions to this issue isn't easy because there's an intergenerational link. If we're going to stop the benefit, when does it stop and who loses out? Frankly, I'm very happy for the state pension to be generously increased at face value because it means that I will benefit from it later, as long as the rules don't change. And that's the big thing. It's will it be changed going forward? And especially when you look at the stats with things like aging populations, it seems increasingly less likely that these promises can be fulfilled. So how exactly are we going to break the intergenerational chain? So one potential solution could be to focus a lot more generous increases on those who claim, for example, pension credit, or maybe entirely overhaul that system. So perhaps switch to a double lock for the main state pension, but actually increase pension credit substantially. So those who are fully reliant on the state pension are much better off, but perhaps the generous increases don't apply to those who are already very comfortable. But this doesn't really solve the intergenerational angle anymore. Anyway, enough of my pointless ramblings on things that won't go ahead. Why don't you tell me, should the state pension triple lock be scrapped? Answers in the comments, please.